what? That means it's a Talking Tuesday, and we love Talking Tuesdays in this state.
Look, and we've got Dabo Swinney's audio coming up here in just a little bit for our listeners, and certainly some interesting things coming out of Tiger Town. But you and I have been talking a little bit more and more about this situation in Columbia, and today I guess it's come to fruition. A former grad assistant who had walked away from the game, so to speak, was getting into like an analyst role, going to be the starting quarterback for South Carolina against Eastern Illinois. What's the latest news, Mike?
How crazy is that? Because it sounds like it's a Disney movie, for crying out loud. And this is a guy that, 2 months ago at the Birdies for Beamer golf outing, I was paired with this guy. And I didn't know who he was. I had no clue. I actually posted a picture of it. Freaking Cocky the mascot, I think, is actually bigger than me in the picture. I'm like stacked with the Jolly Green Giants because Zeb's actually a pretty big guy himself. But yes, Zeb Nolan, the former grad assistant who also played football at North Dakota State, played some football this past spring. And that's something that Shane Beamer pointed out. He's been named the starting quarterback going into week 1, beating out Jason Brown, the grad transfer from St. Francis, and then also Colton Gauthier, who is a true freshman because of Luke Doty still being a little banged up coming from that foot sprain. But Beamer mentioned it today. It's not like this guy was not playing football the last 2 or 3 years. Or to exactly quote him, he said it's not like he was walking down the halls as if he was Uncle Rico, sharing about the glory days. This is a guy that a couple months ago was playing spring football at North Dakota State. And on top of that, for most of his career during his time there, he played behind a guy named Trey Lance, who, oh, by the way, was drafted 3rd overall this past year in the NFL draft. Before that, he had 7 career starts at Iowa State. So he does have Big 5 experience as well. Is he a guy that's going to come in here and, win the Heisman Trophy? Probably not. But at the same time, too, he brings a lot of experience. And when you look at the roster that South Carolina has right now, especially the quarterback room, no one has any experience of playing in front of a crowd like that, especially even Luke Doty going back to last season, because the crowds weren't as full as what we're used to and as we're accustomed to seeing in over the years because of what happened last year with COVID restricting so many stadiums across the country. So he brings that experience and he brings comfort. And that's another thing Beamer mentioned a week ago. When he's out on the field, not just the players, but the coaching staff, they feel comfortable knowing that when he's out there, he's going to get the guys in the right positions and he's going to be able to make the right throws.
Now, one of the things that can certainly help out any quarterback is the running game, and we know that South Carolina is going to need that, especially in the SEC with what they'll be dealing with the likes of a Georgia team that Clemson is going to face off with in the opener, Florida, on and on and on. So what is the situation there, and how big of an impact can that have for this incredible story that's taking place with Zeb, right? Z-E-B, is that right, Zeb?
Yes. Well, shoot. How great of a story is this? The Carry-On Joiner, guy that's gone back and forth between positions, quarterback, receiver. He has been named a starting receiver, and it looks like he'll be playing in the slot to start the year off. So just a tremendous story of a guy that easily could have entered the transfer portal, but he's sticking things out. Jaylen Brooks, a guy that transferred in a year ago from a Division II school, he wasn't even sure if he was going to play last season because for most of the beginning of the year, the NCAA, because of the waiver rules, he had to kind of wait around a little bit. When he did get his number called, it seemed like from a mental standpoint, you could kind of see he was playing catch up a lot of the time. Now he knows what he's doing. And Beamer has just raved about how he has looked, and he brings that vertical threat, something that South Carolina desperately needs, especially after losing Shi Smith a year ago. And then Josh Vann will be the other starting wide receiver as far as tight ends go, because that is going to be a big, big position too, Swanee, when you're talking about being able to get the passing game going. Nick Muse, of course, people know his brother, Tanner, up in Tiger Town. Nick's coming back from an ACL injury from just 2 years ago. He told me last year, it probably wasn't until that Missouri game that he felt like himself, being able to go out there and not thinking about every cut he's making and just being able to play. And then EJ Jenkins is another guy you want to keep an eye on. He came over from St. Francis, a transfer with Jason Brown. This guy is 6'7". He has a basketball-like body. He played some receiver, but they've converted him into a tight end. But he's someone that can play both. I expect South Carolina to be heavy tight end, or to use the tight ends heavily. But on top of that, shoot, and I made this joke earlier, you could throw a quarterback out there with no arms this week. I think at the end of the day, South Carolina is going to try to run the football down their throats, and they have the running backs on paper to be able to do it. What is that going to look like? Kevin Harris looks like he is ready to go. coming from back from that back injury. And then a lot of people are excited to see what Marshawn Lloyd can do after not being able to play last season because of that ACL injury in preseason.
That's a good point you bring up about Lloyd. And I kind of wondered the same thing because you mentioned Nick Muse coming back from his ACL injury and how he said that it took him a while to kind of get his feet underneath him. That's always been the thing for me. And I've been fortunate enough in all my athletic career to never have that type of injury and have to get back from that. I mean, how long do you think it'll take for him to really feel comfortable in that scenario?
I mean, every athlete's different. I mean, not to be the guy of, I'm playing youth basketball at the YMCA, but I mean, I went through 3 injuries in college, 3 major injuries, and the worst one was the lower body, being able to have a foot injury and you need to break that. So that was the most difficult one. Any lower body injury, anything that involves making cuts, are the toughest to come back from. Yes, we can talk about neck injuries. There's no question about that. We know everything that has took place with Clemson receivers over not just this past year, but I mean, going back to the days of Mike Williams as well. So obviously that is a very serious injury as well. But for the most part, lower body injuries can prevent players from being able to come back right away and being able to be like themselves. And I know that's easier, it's easier said than done when you come back to be able to just pick up right where you left off. The problem is the mental aspect of it, because you do overcompensate when you're thinking about every little cut you make. Now, Lloyd has said that he feels exactly like himself. He's making the cuts that he did before he had the injury. They don't have him at any snap count, or they haven't had him on any snap count as far as preseason practices are concerned, or any of the scrimmages. But with that all being said, when the lights turn on, it's a totally different ball game. And even though it's not an SEC matchup, this is a real game. And this will also be his first collegiate game. So the butterflies will be there. I think it's great to be able to have a game like this, though, to be able to get that game under your belt. And if South Carolina is able to get him comfortable after week 1, why not have a good conversation going into week 2, week 3, as perhaps who's going to be the guy to be the starter? Because at the beginning of the year, at the beginning of preseason, it seemed like a lot of people were like, oh, Kevin Harris is going to be the guy. He's not getting the accolades that he deserves, blah, blah, blah. Well, it's no disrespect to Kevin Harris, and this is before we knew about the back injury. I've always thought this. I thought Marshawn Lloyd is the most talented running back on this roster, and if he can prove that, and he can come back from this ACL injury and prove it in week 1, I think that's the reason why people weren't voting Harris to have all these, preseason accolades, is because they just view a guy like Lloyd to potentially be the guy that could be the hot hand moving forward as the season goes on, despite everything that Harris was able to do last year, leading the SEC in the regular season in rushing yards.
Speaking of a hot hand, he's Mike Uva. He's got a hot hand on social media. Take a look at that guy, like $1 million right there. Watch Fox 57 in the Midlands at Mike_UVA. He joins us every week, typically at 5 o'clock, but we got him on a little early today, and it's a big weekend, obviously, for the Clemson Tigers up in Charlotte. And South Carolina will get their hands on the Georgia Bulldogs here in a couple of weeks, about 3 weeks from now. But, when you look at it as an outside observer, I mean, what do you expect to see, Mike, take place up in Charlotte for the Bulldogs and the Tigers as they square off this Saturday night?
Well, I'm still going through the complete press conference for Dabo because, of course, being at the USC one today. But I mean, everything that he kind of hit on, I expect Clemson to try to stay away from Georgia's strengths, and Georgia's strengths are in the trenches, both on the offensive line and the defensive line. They are some big boys. And yes, they have skill position players, but at the same time, too, Clemson has plenty of talent across the board. I think the big question is, we saw what DJ Uiagalelei was able to do last season in his 2 career starts, back-to-back ACC Rookie of the Week honors. The question now is, can the guys around him be able to elevate that game the same way it looked like last year? You don't have Travis Etienne. You don't have the same type of talent at the wide receiver position, or at least it hasn't been proven yet. That's not to say that these guys can't step up and have careers like we've seen many Clemson receivers be able to produce over the last couple of years. When we talk about the quarterback factory over there, I mean, shoot, it's wide receiver you for crying out loud with how much talent has come over and out of that school. So who's going to be the guys at that wide receiver position to be consistent and help step up? Because I just don't think, even if you had Travis Etienne, as good as he is, I think you'd continue just to give him some swing passes, try to get him out into the flats, because Georgia is just one of those teams that they're built to stop the run between the tackles. Now, I say all this, watch Clemson just run down their throat between the tackles, and it's like, good job, Mike. But I honestly think that's the way you do it. And for DJ, I mean, he's a big boy. Why not use that to your advantage? Be able to get him outside the pocket. Be able to, put Georgia in a position where that pass rush just is not the same. And if you can get, the run game going, if you can get the pass game going, that will be able to soften up that pass rush, and you'll be able to run the ball a little bit. It won't be the exact same for Georgia. So I expect Clemson to be the Clemson of old, which is try to throw the football down the field, try to stretch it out from sideline to sideline too, not necessarily just taking vertical shots after every play. That's the beauty about Clemson's offense, and it's honestly like watching a artwork. When it's in motion, just how they use the entire field. It's not like one of these high school teams. They're on the far left hash, right? And they just keep throwing the ball to the left side. No, they use the entire field. And that's one of the things that I've really, really appreciated with Tony Elliott over the last couple seasons, and just how they use that offense. And I expect Clemson to do the exact same against Georgia.
I don't know if the right question, because I get asked this sometimes when I'm doing radio shows elsewhere, but people say, who's this game more important to, Clemson or Georgia? I mean, there's a huge amount of significance for both of these teams. But in your mind, I mean, who really stands to lose the most? Like, who's most in trouble of a college football playoff appearance with a loss in this game? Is it Clemson, or do you think it's Georgia?
I think outside of a blowout for either team, I think Georgia would probably be the team, to me, that would be able to bounce back from it just a little bit more, just because, if you run the table, you're going to have an opportunity to get to the SEC championship. And most likely that strength of schedule will be a little bit stronger than Clemson's. Now, I've mentioned this before. Clemson's strength of schedule is better this year than it's been in years past. And there's a good opportunity that if they do get to the ACC championship, that they'll probably either play North Carolina or Miami, two teams that are in the top 15. Two teams that, when you also add Clemson in there, the ACC has the third most top 15 teams. With those three teams being in the top 15 from the ACC, that conference has the second most, only behind the SEC. So the conference continues to get better. Yes, you're not going to see those teams in the regular season, but the point being is if they take care of business, they get to the finish line, you get to the finish line for the conference title, their strength of schedule will be good, and if you can beat them, you're going to be in good shape. So I think with Clemson, look, unless they get blown out, I don't think there is anything to worry about if they do lose this game. I think more than anything, it'll show, kind of the deficiencies that you need to be able to correct, because, yes, this is a team that is not the same as last year. The defense will definitely be the strong point, and as good as DJ was last year, like I mentioned, what can he do with the talent around him this year? And I think if there is any hiccups, regardless if it's a win, regardless if it's a loss, and we've seen over the last couple of years, Dabo and this staff, they do not waste any time getting right back to work and correcting. It's kind of like Bill Belichick with the Patriots. They try to figure out what they need to do, correct it the next week, and they throw something completely different at you. And I expect Clemson to do that. So outside of a bad loss, I think Clemson's going to be all right regardless.
Final thing for you, have people, and we've got about a minute and a half, have people overestimated, not necessarily DJ, we can focus on him another day perhaps, but JT Daniels? I mean, do we know enough about JT Daniels at this point? Just really 4 games under his belt at Georgia.
No, and I think that's the part when you look back in just the history of Georgia quarterbacks, especially the last couple of years. I kind of just feel like that's kind of the narrative, right? They've been just a team that has produced so many talented running backs that I mean, I don't want to be disrespectful to the quarterbacks that have come before me and say that you could just throw you or me out there, Swanee, at quarterback. But it's been quite some time. Probably go back to what? Matt Stafford. I mean, I'm really trying to just think of a guy that was just so consistent at that position. You didn't really necessarily need to depend on a quarterback to be able to take you to the promised land year in and year out, because they just had so many talented running backs. That's not to say that the quarterbacks they're putting out there are JV quarterbacks by any means. But the point being is, it just seems like their bread and butter has always been in the run game. So, if JT Daniels can get things going, that's going to say a lot, because, I mean, this is a defense that on paper should be one of the best in the country, especially with the pass rush that Clemson returns this season. So, I mean, you talk about stock standpoint, if he's able to perform, his stock's going to go through the roof.
Mike Uval, Watch Fox 57. Appreciate it, Mike. Take care, buddy.
Thanks, Swanee.